I'm going to edit this beginning out. So here we go. Hold on. You better. Oh, okay. So now, notes. Media assets. Okay, come on. That is closing. No one has toned in yet, so I can cut this part out.
Okay, sure.
So, okay, here we go. And for those of you who may have joined us right now, I want to apologize for the difficulty, but it wouldn't be technology if it wasn't difficulty.
A bird sang this song to me. There was a message in its melody, sweetest lyrics that I ever heard. There's a message in the songs of birds. Tomorrow is another day. Living is the only way. Tomorrow's gonna ever come. Listen to the words of the song. Everything's gonna be alright. Everything is gonna be.
I want to thank everyone who may have been on earlier to witness these technical issues. I want to thank you guys for staying. Also, I know some of you all are going to call me and tease me about it, but that's okay too. So I appreciate that. So I want to welcome you today to A Sip of Inspiration. I'm Stephanie Wilson-Coleman, known as the Empowerment Doctor. And as I always say, life is too short to drink cheap champagne. I have a very interesting guest here today. Okay, so I want to read a little bit of his bio. Deric Gilliard retired in 2022 after 25 years of federal communications federal communications lead working for political appointees. Listen to this: for Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and the Biden administration. You guys, that's 5 presidents. I think that is incredibly outstanding. Prior to his work as a public officer, he was advisor to the HHS regional directors for the 8 southeastern states. Those are a lot of states too. Okay, so he was incredibly busy. He served as the National Communications Director for Dr. King's organization, which is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He also worked in communications for 2 HBCUs and wrote for for USA Today, Time, and the Wichita Eagle-Beacon, and was an editor for the Atlanta Daily World. And that's not all. He has been incredibly busy. So for those of you all who are joining me today, I want you to just if you have questions, you can text them in. You know, I have my handy phone. I'll reach out to them and I'll reach into there and see if you have questions. But he also has a book, and I didn't want to not mention that. He's the author of The Longest 4 Years of My Life, A View from the Field by a Black Fed in the Trump administration. So I think that is absolutely awesome. So I want to first congratulate you on actually working through 5 administrations. That is a lot. And I know a lot of people don't know people who actually have worked inside for those many years. So thank you for your service. And let's get started. So you served under 5 U.S. presidents. What was that like, especially being an African American employee?
That's a great question, and thank you for having me. I know we'd worked on this for a couple months, and here it is, and I'm glad to be here. Yeah, you had to be very flexible because that means whoever the president was you were working under, your priorities were that person's priorities. So, when I was with Clinton, it was a progressive, democratic, except for the his crime bill, of course, and that was already instituted by the time I got there. But then you go to Bush, and it's going to be more conservative. It's going to be more, in many instances, I had a lot more freedom because they tend to say, the Trump administration is a whole nother story. But usually Republicans say, just get the job done. You have a little more freedom to do it your way. The whole rule of law thing and, all that. And then, it was back and forth. And a lot of times when these new teams would come in, they had a distrust for the career people because they're thinking, well, he just got through working for Clinton and now he's going to work for me. So how's he going to act? Now, we didn't run into that much with Bush, I would say, probably because I'm sure Bush, his dad told him, because he got mentored and he had what's your boy's name? VP, Dick, I can't remember the vice president's name, so he had more seasoned people around him when Obama came in. It was a bunch of mostly young Harvard and Yale people, even though he had Biden beside him. So I think that there's a lot of times you have to earn their trust, even though you've been there for a long time, but it's a new boss, it's a new team, it's a new mission. And so you're kind of walking on pins and needles there for a while, but you get used to it. In fact, I had a colleague, and I will jump forward just to say this, when it looked like Trump was going to win, and they brought her in specifically, as you said, 8 states is a lot of states. It's the most states of any of the 10 regions. And before we implemented the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, I had all 8 states, but they brought her in so that I'd only have 4. So we put together the Affordable Care Act. We laid the foundation. We did all the things that we needed to do. But then when it looked like Trump was going to win, she says, I can't do this. I'm out of here. She's a sister who's also a reporter from the Denver News, and she left. So there are a lot of people who say, look, I can do this, but I can't do that. And so, yeah, that is something that, is not for everybody.
So what inspired you to join the federal government to begin with?
I had an older cousin who was telling me ever since I got back to Atlanta that I needed to join the federal government. He said, look, lots of opportunities, spend 20, 25 years, you can leave and do something else if you want, all the benefits, all this. But I had ever thought about the federal government, had no interest in the federal government. But then after doing different things and starting my own business, and how you gotta kill what you catch, what you kill, and kill what you eat, right? And then tough times, good times. And I said, okay, let me go and check this out. And it was a really good experience for the most part. But yeah, that's how it was. Because I never had any thoughts of working for the feds. But it's like certain other things you do in life. And then all of a sudden you say, well, okay, let me revisit this.
So can you describe a defining moment from your time in government that shaped your perspective on leadership and on your policy?
I will say that in particular, when Donald Trump was elected, and very quickly it became apparent to me that this was going to be a whole different animal than any. And again, I'd already worked for, three previous presidents, so I kind of had to understand the lay of the land. And then, though, when I saw that he was very dogged and determined, in my opinion, to destroy Obama's legacy, to starve the Affordable Care Act, replace and repeal. They tried over 70 times in court to do that. And then it came to the point that even though it was the law of the land, they prohibited us from supporting the people in the 8 states that we served who were out there doing that work. And a lot of them were doing it without getting paid. I'll give you an example. In Mississippi, you had the Children's Defense Fund. You had the National Baptist Convention. You had My Brother's Keeper. You had these kind of groups who, the NAACP, who did the work without being compensated because they saw how important it was for our people who had never had health insurance, to have access to health insurance. And so then for the administration to tell us we couldn't be out in the field serving them, which was partnering with them and helping to explain what had changed about the Affordable Care Act, because every year there were changes. And they said, no, you can't go. It was like, even though it was law of land, they told us we couldn't honor the law of the land. So at that point in time, I kind of had to make a decision. I said, well, you could get fired for this, but there's a principle there that, is important enough to me to say, well, they're just going to have to, around certain things I was not going to do. I wasn't going to do certain things, but I knew that there were things I could do. And I determined I was going to do the things I could do. And I said, if you fire me for doing my job, well, you're just going to have to fire me for doing my job, because I was mentored by Joseph Lowry and Andy John and C.T. Vivian, and all these people who had risked their lives. So I figured I could risk my job. Didn't want to, but I was willing to,
Yes, that's right. Okay, so you've got a book.
2 books, actually, but yes.
2 books. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the longest 4 years of your life. I love that title. So
yeah.
Why that title?
Indeed it was, because, okay, for one thing, I'll start with this. Very early on, and, you've worked in government too. I don't know if you probably didn't have to work for political appointees.
Oh, yes, I did.
Did you? Okay.
Yes, I did.
So you understand, and a lot of our audience would not probably, but whatever, for example, my first regional director, who we work for, and the regional directors are appointed by the secretary. And so my first regional director was an ACA attack dog. And what I mean by that, she was really good in front of the camera, and she loved to tear down the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare. She was really good at it, and she was a Trump darling, attractive on camera, did her whole thing. And she, but when they didn't, she said at the end, she said, look, the Republicans had, and she meant us, we had 6 years to replace and repeal the Affordable Care Act. We didn't do it, so we should be out supporting the people and helping them understand this law and helping them get enrolled if they want to get enrolled. But one thing that happened in every other administration I worked with, Stephanie, at least 5, if not 6 or 7 of the 10 regional directors for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services were women. In the Trump administration, she was the only one. And she always complained because she said they were always mansplaining her against her and shutting her down. It was like a good old boy network. And you know how that administration felt about and treated women, right? We can look at the news and history and all that, right? And so she left pretty soon, but she So that was real indicative, because to me, women have, they are the principal in most families. They're the principal people who are looking out for everybody's health and well-being, making sure you're getting your checkups, making sure you get what you need. Put that jacket on, little Johnny, before you go out. It's cold. And so when you think about that, and that only one woman was in fact, I'll tell you this, COVID really emerged during the Trump administration, right in 2020. And one of the things she was a nurse by training, and she kept telling them, we really need to be exploring and moving into telehealth. Of course, they brushed her off, wouldn't listen to her. And then when COVID hit and you had all these vulnerable people, these elderly people, particularly in nursing homes and assisted living facilities and all this, who couldn't come to see their doctor in person. So eventually telehealth really took off, but it probably cost us hundreds of thousands of lives because we didn't implement telehealth earlier, and people couldn't come in to get their checkups, to do all the preventive care, which was a key component of the Affordable Care Act. So that was one of the things that was really important about that. So the other thing is that, Donald Trump never wrote anything, okay? He was the tweeter in chief, right? That was when, and so I was, in my, I don't know, however old I was, probably maybe I was 62 years old. So social media was not something you and I grew up in, right? We had to learn it. And I didn't know any social media, including tweeting. Of course, I was probably the oldest of the people in the 10 regions who were the public affairs specialists whose job was to do that. And so I had to learn Twitter. And so and he just castigated so many people, right? He made the justice marches being about the flag and patriotism, not about the over-policing of Black and brown unarmed men, which, really is really what, in my opinion, it was about. So he was tweeting. He'd be up all night tweeting. So I'd find myself, Stephanie, probably about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm over there groping on my nightstand for my phone because I'm looking to see what he has said early in the morning that I'm going to have to respond to that next morning. Okay. So it was just, and he was very divisive, right? He didn't bring people together. It's like right now, he's going after his political enemies. He's going after the district attorney in New York. He's going after James Comey, who indicted him. He's going after all these people. So that was kind of the way he rolled. And so it was always chaos going on. And so that was why it was the longest 4 years of my life, not to mention the fact I almost got fired a couple of times because, just believing that at a certain point you have to stand on principle. But this was the first president I'd ever worked for. And the first one I remember in our lifetime. I mean, they're presidents. I disagreed with every single president I worked for, and I think if you agree with anybody about everything, something's wrong with you. Okay. But this was the first president that I had to question, and I did more than question, to be honest. I didn't believe he loved this country. I believed he loved himself. He loved making money. And so, because he was so divisive, when COVID came, it was the Asian flu, okay? And then when it came to building the border, it was Mexicans and Latinos were rapists and thieves, and how he chastised these Black-led cities, and how he went after the squad, Black women, he and Black women, whether they were reporters, whether they were congresswomen, he went after them hard. He was very nasty and distasteful and I thought dismissive of them. So he rarely had anything good to say about this country. Or the people of this country. He pitted people one against another, and he did it masterfully. And so that's why it made it such a long 4 years, because I didn't ever know what was going to happen next and what I was going to have to respond to. But very little of it was good.
So how did you maintain your integrity and sense of purpose across all these different political climates?
Well,
Every one of these people managed differently.
yeah. I did pray a lot. I did a lot of, to me, something therapeutic for me was getting out and walking. Okay. Getting out of, my desk, getting in the fresh air and just walking, kind of trying to commune with neighbors, with nature as much as I could. Just, it was a stress reliever for me. And, actually when I worked for Trump, we actually had, outside the political appointee, the other three of us were all African American, and all of us, just like in the Obama administration, we had the only all Black regional staff. So you can imagine how cool it was to then implement the first Black president's landmark legislation, the Affordable Care Act. And I'll tell you some story about that later on. But so we, and all of us were believers. So we prayed a lot. We would sometimes not literally, but essentially kind of cry on each other's shoulder. We complained to each other, but we kept each other lifted up and encouraged. And, we knew that we would get through it, but there was some rough times there. But we're strong people. We survived all this, and we knew we would survive that. But it was going to be more than a notion.
That's true, and everything comes to an end.
That's right. If we'll survive everything, and plus, for somebody that again worked for Dr. King's organization and was mentored by the people I'd mentored, and as much as I told my kids growing up about, winners never quit and quitters never win, and how they come from such strong people and such a rich history that I couldn't just quit. I had to do what I had to do. So,
fast forward, you've been motivated to write the book, The Longest 4 Years of My Life. So tell us a little bit about that book and where can people find it?
So I write from three prisms, from three perspectives. I write from, first of all, being a Black man in America, which carries a whole litany of things. Secondly, as a Christian, which, as I mentioned, I have, and my faith is a bigger part of what I do and who I am. And third, as a justice advocate. And again, that comes from, when I, maybe we'll get to talk about this in a second, but when I walked into the doors of Dr. King's organization, now I've been in there before as a journalist and a reporter covering press conferences and things, but to go in there and sign on to be the National Communications Director, that was when I developed my purpose in life. That's when I realized what I was here to do. And my whole life changed in that instance. And I had the nerve and the audacity to actually sit in Dr. King's chair and put my feet up on the desk. But there was this aura.
How was that though? How was that? How did it
make you feel? It was so amazing just being in there with these minds that crafted the movement that led us to this passage of the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the March on Washington, to interact with all these people, spend time with all these people, to sit at their feet was, the joy and the privilege of a lifetime. It's something I never would have thought I would ever be exposed to or have the opportunity to do. But, sometimes, God has mysterious plans for us. And so it was way cool though. And then to lead there and then to go to work for 5 presidents, can you imagine, including the first Black president, and then to institute, to be part of, because so in our 8 states, 7 of our governors were Republicans. Okay. They didn't want to expand Medicaid. the way the Affordable Care Act was deemed, it was designed so that every state would expand Medicaid. Okay. So all these people, and every state has them, the working poor, okay? They're people who park cars, they cut hair, they do nails, they serve tables, they do all these things. And so our society would be in bad shape if you took them away. But most of the times, they can't afford insurance, place to stay, food, utilities, a vehicle. Right. So the thing they don't do is insure themselves in many times. And so and these 7 governors who refuse to expand Medicaid, like here in Georgia, they brag about having a $10 billion surplus, but you're balancing those budgets on the backs of poor, the working poor, and the disadvantaged in many instances. So those governors told us, they said, well, look, if you want to expand Medicaid, we're not helping you. You go do it. You do it, but you're not getting any help from us. So we had to go into these 7 states, build coalitions, and stand up what they call federally facilitated marketplaces. So I'll give you an example. 5 of our 7 states were the least insured in the whole United States. And so in Mississippi, for example, was the worst because Mississippi is the blackest state, it's the poorest state. It's the one with the most health disparities. It's the most illiterate. So that's the state I spent the most time at. But they also are the state with the people with the deepest resolve. They're the strongest people because they've withstood so many things. And so we ended up, and we didn't enroll anybody, but we coordinated these organizations in our 7 states that enrolled, our 8 states, our 7 states that enrolled just under 24% of the people in the entire country in 1 out of 10 region.
Wow.
So, and to do that for the first Black president, it was so cool, so I couldn't have scripted that. And so that was a beautiful thing. And, it was a proud moment, and we were the only ones that actually got to meet him. So one of my most treasured possessions, I should have sent you this picture, was our team meeting him. In fact, we were supposed to meet him once in Florida, and there was a hurricane. And then there was one other time there was a chance, and I was on a retreat, and they said, look, we may get to go do this. And I had to, we got to leave. And it was really cool to go and do that and get that picture. So it was a treasured time. So then to go from there into the Trump administration was rough.
So when did you decide to write the longest 4 years of your life?
Almost immediately. So what I did, I started chronically. Okay, being a journalist, I was used to doing that. I just started, I said, okay, because there were so many strange things happening, so many unprecedented things. So I kept notes the whole way. I kept, I had to write a lot of things. I was in meetings all the time. For example, during COVID, I would be in 3 meetings every single day. And these were meetings one of them was a regional meeting about our 8 states. 2 of them were national meetings, and these were meetings where we would hear about choke points, for example, places where people couldn't get testing, or they couldn't get the vaccine, or there was some issue. And of course, the only time you really hear about it is when there's a problem. Right. I'd have to monitor in our 8 states. I'd monitor what mayors said, what congressmen said, what city managers said. And then I'd have to file this report every day. And then, so I'd give it to my boss, and then I'd have a role, but he'd have to send that up to DC. So I was keeping all this information, and I was seeing like, for example, Albany, Georgia, and Jackson, Mississippi were 2 of the hardest hit areas from COVID. They're 2 of the blackest cities. Right. Because we have lots of Black cities here in the Deep South, and so and then so I was seeing how this was, and I was keeping up with it. And so this was unlike the first book I wrote, which and I'll just digress to say this. So when I was with the SCLC and Dr. King's organization, I kept running around the country with Dr. Lowry, known as the Dean of the Civil Rights Movement. He co-founded the organization.
Mm-hmm.
There were like 60 of them, but he, Ralph Abernathy, of course, Dr. King, several others, and he led it for 20 years of the organization's life. And a lot of your listeners may remember this, but the end of Obama's first inauguration, at the end, they wheeled him out in a wheelchair and he did the benediction and he raised hell because that's what he did as he speaks truth to power. But anyway, I kept running around the country with him and the brain trust in the organization, kept meeting these people. They were 70, 80, 90 years old. And most of them had no health insurance, no life insurance, no 401k, because they had spent most of their lives out marching, being spat upon, being beaten, being dehumanized. And I said, look, young people today don't realize, they don't know who you are. They don't realize that now, for the most part, they can live in any neighborhood they can afford to. They can go to any college and university they want to. They can travel across state lines and without needing a card, right? And I said, do you resent it? And every single one of them, almost Stephanie, little old lady would grab my arm and she goes, oh no, baby, you don't understand. We tore the cotton curtain down. We challenged this country to be what it said it was, right? That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and it should have said, and women, are treated with certain inalienable rights, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It was such a pleasure to do this. And I said, wow, most of these people were uneducated. They had great stories, but they couldn't tell them. So I said, you know what? I think you put me here so that I could help them tell their stories. And so I wrote my first book called Living in the Shadows of a Legend, Unsung Heroes and Sheroes Who Marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, wow.
And it's 20 stories. These are Black, white, men, women, young and old, like the guy who came to Dr. King's door and knocked on his door and asked him if he would come to Montgomery to be their preacher. Now, his dad, Daddy King, they call him, was sitting here listening as he pitched his son, who was 27 years old, 26 at the time. And then when his daddy told him, Martin, you don't want to go there to that big nigga church. All they're going to do is kick you out, because it was a silk stocking church. It was a church where the doctors and the lawyers, the few people they had, the teachers. Right. And so they had already kicked out a very prominent pastor. But guess what? He went. And of course, when he went, he met Rosa Parks.
Yes.
They launched the 381-day Montgomery bus boycott that launched them both into international fame. And when I met him, he was 94 years old, the guy that recruited them. So I tell the forward picture, and every chapter I tell their story. I have a picture of them in the heyday, and at the end, at the picture of when I met them. Another was Dr. Robert Hailing, who led the St. Augustine movement. He's called the father of the Civil Rights Act of 65. He and three of his lieutenants were spying on a Klan rally. The Klan found them. A white patient of his, he's a dentist, identified him. And the guy had just been preaching against that black burrhead nigger dentist. That's what a member of the Klan was preaching. And they brought him before the Klan rally. They beat off three of them into unconsciousness, and they doused them with gasoline. And probably the only reason they didn't set them on fire was 2 weeks earlier was the bombing of the 6th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, where the 4 little girls were killed. So people like that, a young Jewish guy, there were 13 young Jewish guys who came south to be part of something called Scope. And so it was a lot of different people. A white woman whose husband, she and her husband went to Louisville. Her dad was a racist. Her dad used to tell her growing up, her name is Ann Braden, we need to lynch a nigga every once in a while to keep them in their place. Now, she went to college, joined her own, had her own mindset, became very liberal and progressive, married this another journalist, a white journalist named Carl Braden. They're moving in an all-black neighborhood in Louisville with the express purpose of buying a house in a white neighborhood, then turn it over to a black couple. They did that. The couple moved in. The house was firebombed. He was charged with sedition. he went to prison in Atlanta. And so she reached out to Dr. King to help her husband get out of prison. So fascinating stories. Now, that book was a labor of love. It was a great privilege to write it because it was inspiring stories about these people who, through nonviolence, overcame a system and they helped change this country. They pushed it. But opposed to the Trump book, that was something I felt I had to do because somebody who was inside who could tell that story so that we would hopefully and prayerfully not go back to where we are now. So that when we get out of this, we won't revisit it. And so I felt it was a laborious ride. It was painful, but I thought, this is what I thought. I thought Kamala was going to win, hoped and prayed, right? And I felt they'll use this books in sociology departments, in political science departments, in history departments, in health policy departments. And yet we're living it, and we're living it on steroids now.
So what's one thing that you hope the future generations can take from your writing? It doesn't have to be just one, okay?
Yeah, you said just one, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be just
okay. Well, from my first book, I think that they can take that, again, the resilience of the human spirit, of being able to overcome, because if you, Dr. King talked about these people, he called them the unknown ground crew, Stephanie, and he said, without these people, the jet flights to freedom, he said, these people who are willing to suffer for righteousness' sake, because they did, people spat upon them, they abused them, they dehumanized them, and sometimes they killed them, right? And so yet they resisted nonviolently, which is, what Christ tells us in the Bible. It's one thing to say it and hear it, but another thing to do it, right? But they did that. So I think that they proved that, if your heart is right and your commitment is right, you can make a real difference. And so I think that they showed the strength of Black people and the human spirit. And so that's what I hope they get out of that book. In the second book, I think that I hope they get the fact that democracy is very fragile and we can lose it really quickly. Okay. Like right now, right? Where you're sending troops are being sent into cities who don't ask for them. People are being rounded up. Our country, most people, it's probably this way in Chicago too. The people here that cut our grass, the people who build the additions on our house, the people who pick our fruits and vegetables and detail our cars, all these people are, they come over here and they risk life and limb to come to this country. They don't come over here to rape and pillage. They come over here to build a better life where hopefully they won't, they have the freedom to work. And most of them, they all pay taxes and most of them send money home. And yet we're having a country where we're rounding people up, and you and I aren't going to do that work. Who's going to do it now? So I just think that it's easy to take for granted what we have, and so I think that people will be they'll be much more committed to going out and voting, because a lot of people think, well, it doesn't really matter who's in office. Yeah, it matters, right? If we didn't know it before, we know it now. And also the right to vote is sacred. Think about the people who died for that right, who gave up so much.
Yes, they did.
And so, it's just a reminder, and it's something that I think that we hopefully will cherish and hold dear.
Yes, and it's so easy to forget when your life is working out and doing well and you don't run into any of those things. It's so easy for us to forget because we have been able to most of us have been able to build that life where, we have a home, our kids are going to schools, they're graduating. We graduated from college. They're going to college too. And we forget all of the things that it took for us to get here.
Yeah. It wasn't always that way. And you remember this probably too. And I'll only date me. I won't try and date you. But I remember when my parents didn't have the right to vote, right? I remember that. And I remember one instance, and your listeners will probably appreciate this. I don't remember what we were going back to my father's family. They had a family reunion, every year, and big family, these big agrarian families that we had in the South, 10, 12, 13 kids, right? And they were a real close family, and we were driving. And so this would have been the early 60s. And we usually didn't like to stop, but you had to stop and get gas, right? You may have to stop to relieve yourself. And certainly in the South, that was because there were lots of sundown towns, right? So we were going, and we stopped at this gas station. I don't know, it must have been 4 or 5. So my mom takes me to the bathroom, I go in and, do what I have to do. I come out, turn the water off, turn the light off. And my mother lit into me. And I had no idea why. And it wasn't, till many years later, she opens the door back up, turns the water back on, turns the light back on, that I realized that, and the restroom we went to said colored. Mm-hmm. It was dirty. It was filthy. Mm-hmm. It was, and it was, and we never talked about it, but it took me many years, maybe decades later, to realize she was upset at me because the only way she could strike back at this unjust system that dehumanized her and her child was to waste their resources. And so that's why, many of us in our community, I think, we have these issues, right? Whether it's, violence, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's depression, whether it's all these diseases that we develop, from cancer to high blood pressure, all of these things, because it's that pressure of living in a society that doesn't see you as fully human. And that's not everybody, but it's way too many people.
Yes, it is. I had an uncle who was a civil rights attorney during that time. Yeah. And when you talked about this story of going to the restrooms, I can remember my cousin and I were traveling with him, and we were really, really young. And she was hungry. She was older than me. She was hungry. So we stopped for something to eat. And the guy came up to the counter and says, "What do you want, little girl? We don't serve colored people." Mm-hmm. And she said, "I don't want any colored people. I want a hamburger and a Coke." And he was so taken aback by that, he gave her a hamburger and a Coke and told us to go on about our way. So, yes, I remember. Oh, boy, do I remember those times. Yeah.
And we were the first generation, I would say, that mm-hmm. really had the opportunity to go to any college we had the grades to go into. It was then affirmative action was considered a positive thing. And, they wanted to open the doors for us and try and begin, at least to an extent, of leveling the playing field. One of my unsung heroes, she tells a story about, she was in Montgomery, Alabama, and they saw the Freedom Riders come in and be attacked in Montgomery. Those two buses that led to, her mom happened to send her downtown to the store, and she was there when they came. And so she was a young activist, and she and this this group, and they were like 10, 12 years old. And they would go and sit in the 5 and dimes in Montgomery, those stores like Kresge and Woolworths. They sit on the stool, and the stool would turn around, and they would go in there to see how they would be treated. And just what you said, the waitress would say, "We don't serve niggas." And then she would say, "Well, we don't eat them." Because she tells that story. But then, and then she said there were 2 cops there to make sure that things didn't get out of hand. But over the time, these cops went from being, part of the institution that believed in racism and Jim Crow to where their heart opened up to these children because they were operating out of dignity and grace. Mm-hmm. And so I mean, your heart can change. And so that was it. It's just, there's so much there, but to be part of all of this and to see all this. And so our children, they didn't grow up in that kind of society, so they don't understand unless we teach them. And I think that one of the real failings, I'll say this, for my generation, it isn't everybody in my generation, but too many people in our generation, and maybe part of it is they were running from the pain themselves. And because we all saw our parents marginalized and mistreated and dehumanized. And so I think that's why a lot of us moved to the suburbs, and a lot of us really don't want to engage in our history. But, it hurts, but it heals. And it's the struggle that made us strong. That's why we are survivors. That's why we are where we are. And so too many of our children are ill-equipped to deal with those things because they haven't been taught. And I just, that's one of my real pet peeves, is to make sure, because the people who fails to remember their history, we know what, right, is doomed to repeat it. And so the difference between my first book and my second book, I'm seeing these things that we accomplished, we achieved, hard fought, we set with great sacrifice, that's being clawed back. It's being taken back. And Project 2025 lays it all out. Most people have no clue and won't take. I had my old father, my grandfather-in-law used to tell people, he's a dentist in Chicago, he used to tell people, you want to hide something from a black man, put it between the pages of a book, the covers of a book. And that's sad. So, but we really need to know that this is all by design, all that's happening. And so we have to come together. And I see pushback. I see things happening like, the censorship, like, for example, Jimmy Kimmel getting fired. I mean, that's one example, right? But enough people push back, and now they're putting him back on the air. Like taking Harriet Tubman out of the Smithsonian, and taking all of these people like Jackie Robinson, taking them out. And then there was enough pushback that they put them back in. But then they'll find another way to do it. And there's so much distractions. But we're in a place that I thought we'd never go back to. I thought we were past this. But there are people, and I think a lot of them are afraid, quite honestly, particularly people who live in these homogenous, like all white societies, which is really in some ways like an all black society. If you interact with other people, if you break bread with other people, you understand that for the most part, we all want the same things. We want to make a good living. We want to live in safety. We want to educate our kids and leave our families something. But this president is really brilliant at othering. Those people are bad. Those people are dangerous. Those people are I think the hidden message is those people are going to treat you like they have been treated, because there's this thing about the browning of America, and supposedly right around 2042-ish, we're going to become a majority country. And there are people who are concerned that, hey, but we know we're not that kind of people. That's not what we're interested in. We just want to be seen as fully human and have every opportunity you have.
Yeah, now I think it's 2035 when the browning is going to take effect, supposedly. But we still have overlooked how the amount of differences. We think that the amount of differences between people is like this wide, right? But it's not. Right. Our DNA is still practically the same. Everything within us that makes us people is the same.
Yeah, we have the same blood, right?
Blood, right. Yeah. So we need to start thinking about that as opposed to what we are thinking about, because the more I think we are focusing on a lot of material things and someone has more than me or not more than me, when there's ways, and under some of the presidents that you worked for, they were normalizing everything so that people could have the same thing. People could have access to health care. They can have access to food and to stuff like that. But I think another problem too is when it comes to food, a lot of our kids don't even know how we get food. They just think you really do go to the grocery store. And the grocery store is doing the food, right?
That's right.
So that's, as a matter of fact, I remember someone at work because we would bring fruit and stuff to school, to work, and share it with everybody. And someone says, "Oh, there's dirt on this." It's like, this isn't good. It's like, and it says, "Well, where do you think that comes from?" Whole Foods makes this. I says, "Oh no, oh no." But yeah, we do have those kinds of things that is happening too that we need to be sure that uh, we pay attention to. So you worked with Dr. King's organization. So what are some more of the lessons or things you learned that we need to do right now? Because some things we learn things and then we put it on the table because we think, okay, check that off, that's working right now. Check that one off, that's working right now. When we find out that it's not working yet, it's not working again.
I think we stepped in what I call a microwave society, right? We're used to, you put it in there, you hit 60 seconds, and then everything is good. Or you watch, TV and everything gets solved in 60 minutes. I'll tell you this, when I was with the SCLC, one of the things we did, for example, we fought against disparities in sentencing. Why, if you got caught with crack cocaine, were you sentenced 7 times longer than if you got caught with powdered cocaine? We fought against educational tracking. So whereas kids, Black and brown kids, were being directed towards vocational schools and learn with your hands, and nothing wrong with that. But if you had the intellect or the acumen to be a physicist or an attorney or an accountant or an engineer, you didn't get that opportunity. We always had something. We had a campaign called "Teach Your Dollar Some Sense." For example, one of the things in the Black community, we do not turn our money around in our community. We're the community that takes our money. Our money leaves our community like, Jack Flash. And whereas other communities, money keeps turning around in that community to benefit that community. We dealt with like redistricting, for example, and we almost never won. We may win 1 out of 15 times. We stayed out there protesting, marching, campaigning. And for example, it led to our work led to congressional districts. For example, we added a congressional district now and led by Hank Johnson here in Atlanta, so that before we just had one Black congressional district, and that was John Lewis's district. And I think the groundwork that we did, that was later supplemented by Stacey Adams and a whole bunch of Abrams and a whole bunch of other people, led to the election of Raphael Warnock as senator and John Ossoff as senator. And those two senators in Georgia, the first time since the 90s, we had Democratic senators, allowed Biden to put in all this great legislation that let us survive through COVID, And so a lot of times you won't see the victory, but that doesn't mean, Bible talks about don't grow weary in well doing. And so you got to keep doing it. You keep hammering, you stay on the wall because it's the right thing to do. And you may not be the ones. It's just like those people in my first book. I think they knew they weren't going to be the beneficiaries of the sacrifices they made. They were doing it for their children and their children's children. And so now we're reveling in it, but, we don't appreciate it in many instances. It's so easy to lose that. And so that was part of it. We spoke out. He spoke against bombing in Kosovo. We spoke against drugs coming into the Black community. We spoke against all the hate crimes, like James Byrd. Remember in Texas, they grabbed him and they drug him and he became decapitated. All these kind of crazy things. So Dr. Lowry, I used to tell people, Dr. Lowry was masterful because he knew something about everything. I used to tell people every time Dr. Lowry went to the bathroom, we called a press conference. So, but he made sure that what the issues that were important to people, he was able to articulate them in a really good way. And so it was, and you think about today, when there's so much going on and so much heartache and despair, and we need more people out there who can speak to that and can galvanize people around issues, to challenge, to speak truth to power, to challenge the powers that be and call them out when they're wrong, because it's almost like your child. If you have a child, right, you don't let your child just do anything they want. Now, they won't like you when you're disciplining them, when you're providing boundaries, but when they grow up, they'll realize that, because guess what? Either we're going to visit them, put flowers on their grave, or we're going to visit them in jail. And so if you love somebody, it's just like loving this country. If we love this country, and we do, because we sacrifice so much for it, we need to challenge it and call it out when it's wrong. And so that was something that I learned there. And people did it at great sacrifice. These people who had, given up so much and bled so much. But so that was model for me. And that's something that I try and teach and pass on and try to model it, And so for me to, not be courageous and yet still be wise, because I felt like I could help somewhat. I helped as much as I could on the inside during the Trump administration without getting fired. I danced that line a whole lot of times, but I said, well, if they're willing to fire me for this, they're just going to have to fire me for it. But, so that's kind of how it went.
Yes, I didn't get fired either, but I think I'm kind of mean. So it's like, so where can we find your books?
Absolutely. So, and thank you for allowing me to put my website there on the page, and it's www.dericgilliard.com. And there you can also find out about my 2 books, because my first book you won't get on Amazon. You could get it on Amazon, but I'll be honest, Amazon takes a big advantage of its authors. And so I much prefer you get it from me, but if you want to get it from Amazon, you can. But you'll find out about my journey, what makes me who I am, what motivates me, why I do what I do. And I'll be honest, when it's time for me to go, and also if you Google me, you'll see things like this podcast, you'll see interviews, you'll see a bunch of stuff about me. I think what motivates me and why I do what I do. One of the things that, for example, when I left HHS, I said, well, and I'm a praying man, I'm a faulty man. I got a whole lot of issues, but I'm a prayer. That's probably why I pray so much, right? But I said, Lord, I would like to stay in this justice lane that I was in at the SCLC. I felt like I was in working for the 2 HBCUs, working for Black Press, then working for the first president, helping getting like Black maternal health care. Black women die at this huge rate, compared to white women in childbirth. And we know, all these things, the health disparities. And then I said, I'd love to do something that continues in this work. And I go to church at this intentionally multicultural church with this white architect who I've known for years. And he said his company was putting in a bid to build the national monument to the 1961 Freedom Riders, whose 2 buses came south to test the law that said public accommodations had to be honored. They were integrated. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And actually, this company got the bid. So for the last 2 years, I worked on that project. And it was another great, humbling experience, and was such a privilege and an honor to be part of, because their bus was firebombed in Anniston, Alabama. And that's where the Klan surrounded it, punched out the tires through incendiary devices, followed it out of town till it couldn't go any further, pulled it over, and they burnt that bus to a crisp. And when the people tumbled off the bus, they beat them. And so to be part of that, honoring that sacrifice and that courage those people had, and they were Black and white, they were young and old, and they came down there. And so I'm praying now, God, give me another opportunity. Let me stay in this lane. But yeah, get my book. I hope you'll get it, support me, because guess what? Everybody wanted to hear about my first book. I got invited to colleges and universities all over. I spoke to the troops in Germany just before Desert Storm. I was the first keynote speaker at the Rosa Parks Museum and Library in Montgomery. But this book, people are afraid of this book. They don't want to talk about it because colleges and universities can't bring me on because Trump will pull their funding. it's just it's hard. So yeah, I do ask people to support the work.
Okay, I really did enjoy this. You've done a lot of things, a lot of great things. And I know what it's like to survive 5 presidents while Black. So you did a good thing there. So I want to encourage the listeners to contact Deric. He has his website on, it's DericGilliard.com.
Yeah.
That's his name. So go there and actually purchase a book. So I want to thank you for walking us through your truth, and it was just wonderful. And I hope the listeners or the viewers actually appreciated it as much as I do. So your storytelling, your commitment to honor the past by pushing forward is absolutely inspiring. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
For our listeners, I want you to remember this. It takes strength to stand inside a system and still speak the truth. It takes vision to turn history into legacy, and it takes courage to tell your story, even when it shakes the room. So I want you guys all to remember that. I want to thank you for joining me. This was a fantastic conversation. And again, guys, go to his website and order the book. That's always the first choice, okay? And if you have to go to Amazon, then go to Amazon. But
go to Amazon and please write a review, because I need more reviews.
That's right. Yeah. Write reviews if you go to Amazon, because that's important to all authors to have that review. That actually helps determine where in their rotation algorithm your book will be. So I appreciate you for doing that. So with that, I want to encourage everyone to trust your greatness and embrace your power. May this day offer you just what you need in each unfolding moment. I want you to be inspired and to further notice, just celebrate everything. Do not go gently into that good night, but find a hero worth dying for and take it. And I want you to be the person that you are waiting for. And as I always say, with the right pair of shoes, I can accomplish anything. So with that, make today so awesome that yesterday gets jealous, and above all else, do it your way, because life is too short to drink cheap champagne. Thank you for being with me, and congratulations on your books. Congratulations on all that you've done, and thank you for sharing that with us this evening.
Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome. So with that, I want to say good night to everyone.
Too short to drink cheap champagne, so I decided to buy me a better brand to taste with my strawberries. What